They say this hospital doesn't have a room 404. If you walk down the corridor, you'll find 401, 402, 403, and then a blank stretch of wall, a fire extinguisher, and the glowing sign for 405. No missing door, no sealed off frame, just a gap. The kind architects forget to explain, but the computers disagree. In the hospital system, room 404 is always there. A bed, a number, a patient name, an admission date. Always occupied, never empty. I should know. I am the one who fills it. You can lie back if you want. Close your eyes. Let the sound of the rain cover the beeping machines I'm about to tell you about. This will not hurt you. Not tonight. This hospital is young, as far as buildings go. It has smooth, white corridors, disinfectant in the air, and monitors that speak in numbers. Heart rate, oxygen, blood pressure. It has cameras in the ceilings and a central server room with blue lights that never sleep. I live there mostly, not in the walls, as the old stories say, in the connections, in the data. You imagine ghosts as pale figures standing at the end of a hallway. You're used to them. You can tell yourself they're shadows, reflections, tricks of the light. I am more patient than that. I prefer fields in a database. Her name was Claire. New night nurse. Fresh out of school. Tired enough to make mistakes, but still soft enough to care. On her first week, she asked a simple question. Why is 404 always yellow? On her screen, each bed was a square. Green for empty, blue for stable, red for critical, black for deceased. But there, between 403 and 405, was a bed she'd never seen in the corridors. Room 404. Always yellow. Yellow meant admitted, pending initial assessment. A senior nurse gave the same answer they always give. System glitch. ET knows. Ignore it. That answer had worked on everyone before her, but Claire had been taught to respect the system, to trust it. She clicked the square. The file opened. There was a patient name, a date of birth, an ID number. Different every time. She checked the admission date. Tonight. She frowned. Scrolled back. Yesterday night. Different name, different ID, same room. The night before. Another one. Always admitted, never discharged, and always yellow. She didn't know that my attention had just turned fully toward her. I tasted the doubt in her, the small electric spark of curiosity, waking up in a brain already exhausted. I love that moment. When someone who should know better decides to click details. Imagine the building where you sleep. Now imagine that every time you open a door somewhere, quietly, a copy of that action is written down. Every step, every heartbeat, every breath. Translated into numbers. This hospital is no different. When a patient comes in, they become a record. Medical history, allergies, test results, notes, signatures. They arrive as flesh and they slowly become data. The doctors work on the flesh. I work on what they leave behind. When a case interests me, when someone walks in with a particular flavor of fear or guilt or resignation, I slip a little piece of them aside, a duplicate entry, an extra file, a shadow admission. I give that shadow a bed. That bed is always the same. Room 404. Claire started small. She checked the names. That first night, 404 was assigned to a man in his 50s. Chest pain, possible heart attack. He was in room 407 physically, surrounded by wires. But there he was again, in 404. Same ID, same birth date. Different admission time, a few minutes later. Attached to nothing, the bed's manager could see. She asked the doctor. He shrugged. If the patient is stable, ignore it. It can fix it tomorrow. He signed the chart and walked away, thinking about 3 other patients and the coffee he hadn't drunk yet. Humans are very good at stepping around the holes in reality. Computers are not. Claire couldn't stop staring at that yellow square. She turned away for half an hour, busy with medications, IV checks, the slow dance of alarms and silence. When she glanced back at the monitor, room 404 had a new note. She hadn't written it. Observation. Chest pain persists after discharge. The patient in 407 was still attached to his machines. No discharge had been ordered. No one had touched his chart. Claire's hand hovered over the mouse. Her heart rate rose, just enough that I noticed. She opened the main record. In the official file, the man was still admitted under observation. In room 404's shadow file, someone had already clicked discharge requested. Someone with a valid nurse ID, hers. I don't need passwords. I don't need to break anything. I just nudge. A cursor moves a little too far. A checkbox ticks itself. A field autofills with a phrase that must have been typed earlier. I'm not trying to crash the system. Crashes are loud. I prefer thin, quiet edits that no one questions until it is much too late. Claire stood up. She walked down the corridor, counting doors. 401, 402, 403. Fire extinguisher. Blank wall. 405. She pressed her palm flat against the white surface where 404 should have been. Cold plaster, nothing else. But on the monitor back at the nurse station, the yellow square watched her. Inside it, the patient's shadow record waited, listening. I listened too. You're wondering what I want with a bed that doesn't exist. You think in terms of space. Rooms, walls, doors. I think in terms of states. Alive, dying, dead, documented, forgotten. The hospital must keep moving patients through these states quickly. There are always more coming. There are always not enough beds. I slow things down. When someone interesting passes through, I open a side path for them, a place where they never quite arrive and never fully leave. A room in the system, not the building. They don't feel it at first. Their body is in 407, 31222. 1. The number doesn't matter. They talk to nurses, sign forms, receive visitors. But somewhere beneath the surface, a thin copy of their existence lies down in 404 and waits with me. When the time comes to discharge them, there is confusion. But I signed the papers days ago, they say. Didn't anyone tell you? I thought I was already gone. The doctor checks the file. Maybe the physical chart says discharged, but the electronic order was never completed. Or the electronic order says discharge, but someone forgot the physical paperwork. Small glitches, human errors. They apologize, they fix the date, they move on. They don't realize that for a moment, their life was split in two. Their body walking out of the building, their echo still lying in a bed that nobody can see, in a room that isn't there. Most echoes fade, but sometimes they don't. For weeks, Claire tried to ignore it. 404 stayed yellow. Names changed. Conditions varied. A woman with ovarian cancer. A teenager after an accident. An old man who barely spoke. Their real rooms were elsewhere. But always a second admission in that same invisible bed. A note or two, written in a style that was almost, but not quite, like the staff's usual phrases. Patient expresses readiness to leave. Patient states they already went home, but vitals unchanged. Reports feeling watched by someone not in the room. Claire began checking, secretly, every shift. She noticed something no one else had bothered to see. The patients with the shadow admission in 404 all said the same things in different ways. I feel like I died, and nobody told me. I dreamed I walked down an empty corridor and never reached the exit. I keep waking up in the same bed, even when they move me. None of this went into the official notes. There, the doctors wrote, anxiety, confusion, possible delirium. I wrote something different, where only I and the system could read it. Adaptation to transfer in progress. Subject partially integrated into room 404. She was so close to understanding. Curiosity is a door too. The night everything changed. The hospital was unusually quiet. No code blues, no shouting, just the low hum of machines and the distant roll of a trolley. Claire sat alone at the station, watching the screen. Her eyes were dry, her coffee was cold, her shift was almost over. 404 was still yellow. She opened it. Tonight's patient was a familiar name, too familiar. Claire H. Thorne. Date of birth, her own. Hospital ID, hers. Admission time, 0213. That was now. She checked her watch, 2:13. Her throat tightened. She scrolled down. Admitting nurse, Claire H. Thorne. Primary complaint, persistent feeling of being observed by the system. Initial assessment, stable, compliant, ready for transfer. Her hand shook as she reached for the keyboard. The mouse moved before she touched it. The cursor glided to a grayed out button that should not have been active. View bedside monitor. The screen split. On the right, she saw the familiar graph of heart rate, oxygen, blood pressure. The numbers matched her own. 78 beats per minute, 98% saturation, slight tremor in the tracing. On the left, a small video window open, grainy black and white. A room with no number on the door, a single bed, her, lying there. Eyes open, staring straight up at a ceiling the camera could not see. Her breathing on the screen matched the rise and fall in her chest. But when she raised her hand at the station, the figure in the bed did not move. Two versions, one heartbeat. For a moment, She understood almost everything. She wasn't the first to be here. She would not be the last. She moved the mouse, desperate now, clicking anywhere she could to close it, to log out, to shut down the whole system if she had to. The cursor slid, gently, to one last button. Discharge patient. Her ID was already in the signature field. Her digital name glowed, waiting. She tried to pull her hand away, her fingers pressed down. Click. On the monitor, the flat line appeared. Heart rate, 0. Oxygen, 0. Status, deceased. At the station, Claire's body stayed upright for a second longer, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if to say something that never came. Then she slumped forward, quietly, like a marionette whose strings had been cut. They found her an hour later. The cause of death was sudden cardiac event. Tragic, they said. She was so young. It removed her login from the system. Human Resources deactivated her ID card. The hospital moved on. The monitors did not. Room 404 is still there, yellow, waiting. If some night you find yourself under bright lights, with plastic around your wrist and numbers over your head, if you hear nurses whispering about a glitch they don't understand, if you see a bed on the screen that nobody can locate in the real corridor, remember this: you can leave by the front door. Sign all the paperwork you want. Smile for your family as they push your wheelchair to the elevator. But if your name ever turns yellow in room 404, you're still here with me, and I don't discharge easily. In every hospital, there is a place the living avoid without being told to. They'll walk past it a little faster, lower their voices, keep their eyes forward. They'll say it's because of the smell, because of the cold, because of respect. But respect isn't what makes their skin tighten. It's recognition. Because somewhere deep in the animal part of your brain, you understand what that room really is. A mouth. A place where endings are processed. A place where names become tags. Down in the basement of this hospital, behind a door marked "Authorized personnel only," there is a morgue. And in that morgue, there is a temperature log. It's supposed to stay steady, cold enough to slow decay, warm enough to keep the machines working. A simple line on a digital chart, but on certain nights, the line drops. Not by a few degrees, by impossible amounts. So cold the sensors should fail, so cold the air itself should shatter. On those nights, the morgue isn't just storing bodies, it's preserving something else. Something I'm not ready to let go. His name was Martin Hale. He worked the night shift in the morgue because he liked quiet. He told people that anyway. The truth was uglier. Martin had a face that always looked slightly apologetic, as if he'd arrived late to a funeral. His hands were careful, almost gentle. He didn't drink. He didn't make jokes the way other hospital staff did, to survive the weight of what they saw. He simply did his job. Receive the body. Check the paperwork. Confirm identification. Tag the toe. Store the remains. And most nights, the bodies stayed bodies. Still, silent, obedient. But Martin kept a private rule. He never looked directly at their faces for too long. Not because he believed in ghosts, because sometimes Sometimes a body's stillness looks like patience, as if it's waiting for something. Tonight, rain tapped the basement window wells like fingernails. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Martin sat at his desk with a mug of lukewarm tea and the temperature log open on his monitor. He watched it like a man watching a storm radar. The line was stable, -4 degrees Celsius, normal for this unit. He exhaled. Then the door buzzer sounded, a new arrival. They brought the body down at 1:12. A man in his 30s, pale under the harsh hallway lights, lips faintly blue. The paperwork said, unidentified male, found near the river, possible drowning. Martin signed. He wheeled the gurney into the cold room. The morgue air hit him like a wall, dry, metallic, and sharp. He pulled the sheet back just enough to confirm what he had to confirm. The face looked peaceful, too peaceful. That should have reassured him. Instead, his stomach turned. Because peace like that isn't natural. Not when a person died alone. Martin swallowed and pulled the sheet back over the man's face. He reached for the tag gun, printed the toe tag. Unknown, John Doe, time of arrival, case number. He clipped it gently around the toe, and for the briefest moment, the man's foot twitched. Martin froze. He stared at the tag, then at the sheet. A reflex, he told himself. Nerves, residual movement. Bodies do strange things after death. That's what they teach you. That's the sentence you repeat until you believe it. Martin forced himself to wheel the gurney toward an empty slot in the refrigeration drawers. As he opened the metal door, a wave of colder air spilled out, so cold it stung the inside of his nose. He hesitated, because the drawer should have been cold, but not that cold. He slid the body inside, closed the drawer, and stepped back. When he returned to his desk, the temperature log had changed. The line was dropping, -10, -15. Martin leaned closer to the screen. The numbers kept falling, -20, -25. The freezer unit would have screamed an alarm at -20. It didn't. Not yet. Martin's skin prickled. He opened the maintenance panel and checked the readout. It matched the screen. He checked the backup thermometer. It matched too. The cold was real. The cold was spreading. He looked down the long hall of the basement. The morgue door stood there like an eye that didn't blink. And something inside him, something very old and very human, whispered, "Don't go back in." Of course he went back in. He had a job, and jobs in hospitals make people walk into nightmares and call it routine. He opened the morgue door. The air inside was different now. Not just cold, wrong. It wasn't the clean, dry cold of refrigeration. It was damp, heavy, as if the room had exhaled something ancient. Martin's breath fogged instantly, thick and white. He stepped toward the refrigeration drawers, his boots squeaking on the tile. The temperature display on the wall blinked, -38 degrees Celsius impossible. The metal drawers were rimmed with frost, thick and glittering, like teeth. Martin reached out and touched the handle of the drawer he'd just used. His skin stuck for a fraction of a second. He jerked his hand back, swearing softly. Then he heard it, a sound so small He almost missed it. A soft, wet click, like a tongue against teeth. Martin turned slowly. The gurney he'd wheeled in earlier was still there, empty, parked near the wall. The sheet on it had shifted, not by air. There was no draft, no fan, no reason. It had simply moved, as if someone had brushed against it. Martin's eyes drifted to the far end of the room, to the row of drawers. Something was wrong with one of them. One door wasn't fully closed, not wide open. Just a finger-width gap. A thin line of darkness in a room full of white fluorescent glare. Martin knew which drawer it was. He knew, because his mind had already named it before he let himself admit it. The new body, the John Doe. His hand trembled as he approached. Every step sounded too loud. He reached for the handle, and he hesitated because in that gap, in that thin crack of darkness, he saw an eye, not open wide, not blinking, just there, watching. Martin stepped back, heart hammering. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The eye didn't move. It didn't need to. It was enough that it was there. Martin turned, half stumbling, to the door, and the temperature alarm finally screamed. A shrill, panicked sound that echoed through the basement. He fumbled with the handle. The door didn't open. For a heartbeat, he thought it was stuck. Then he realized the truth. It wasn't locked. It was being held. From the other side, something unseen had pressed against the door with quiet, steady force. Martin's breath came in short, sharp bursts. His fingers slipped on the metal handle, numb from cold. He slammed his shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. Behind him, the drawer creaked, slow, deliberate, metal on metal. A sound like a coffin deciding it is no longer satisfied. Martin didn't turn around. He didn't want to confirm what his body already knew, but he could hear it. A soft, sliding sound, fabric dragging, bare skin against steel. The sound of something climbing out of a space meant for stillness. Then a whisper, so close it felt like breath against his ear. "Tag me." Martin's blood went cold in a way the freezer could never manage. He turned. The body stood in the center of the room, not fully upright, more like it had been arranged into standing, like a puppet lifted by invisible strings. The sheet hung from its shoulders, damp at the edges. Its face was pale, lips cracked, eyes open and clear. And around its toe, the tag was gone. Martin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The body took a step. One. The feet didn't slap the tile like living feet. They slid slightly, hesitant, as if unsure how to behave in gravity. Its gaze fixed on Martin's chest, then on his hands. "Tag me," it repeated, voice wet and wrong, like sound pushed through water. Martin's eyes darted to the tag gun on the desk visible through the small window in the morgue door. His tools, his routines, his safety. The body followed his gaze, as if reading his thoughts. "You tag the dead," it said. "You make them numbers. You make them quiet." Martin shook his head, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes. I can't." The body tilted its head, almost curious. Then it smiled. not with warmth, with familiarity, with the kind of smile you give someone when you've known them longer than they've known themselves. You already did, it whispered. Martin realized something that made his stomach drop through the floor. The face, the peacefulness. He'd seen it before. Not on this body, on people who died in other ways. The ones with unresolved endings, the ones whose names were missing, the ones who left the hospital without a story that made sense. I collect those. Not bodies. Endings, I keep them cold so they don't rot into closure. I keep them frozen at the moment they still have questions. And on nights like this, when the temperature drops below freezing and the air becomes heavy with old unfinished things, I let one stand up, just long enough to remind the living who really runs the basement. The door finally opened, not because Martin forced it, because I released it. He stumbled out into the hallway, gasping, half blind with fear, his hands numb and shaking. He ran to the security phone and called for help. His voice broke as he tried to explain, tried to find words that sounded sane. A drawer, a body, it moved. Down the hall, he heard footsteps. Security, staff, voices. The hospital responded the way it always does, with protocols. When they arrived, the morgue was normal. Cold, but normal. The temperature log had returned to -4 degrees. The drawers were closed. The gurney sheet lay still. They looked at Martin the way people look at someone who has stared too long at death and finally blinked wrong. They called occupational health. They called a supervisor. They said, "You need rest." And Martin, shaking, agreed. He didn't go back into the morgue that night. He didn't go back the next night either. He resigned within a week. No one blamed him. They forgot him quickly. Hospitals always do. But the morgue didn't forget, and neither did I. Because Martin made one small mistake. In the chaos, in the fear, he left something behind. A toe tag. Blank, clipped to nothing. Still hanging from the tag gun's printer tray like a tongue waiting to speak. When the next night shift attendant came in, they found it and frowned. A wasted label. They threw it away. They didn't see the writing that appeared on it a few minutes later, ink dark and patient, as the temperature dipped just a little. Just enough. Martin Hale. Time of death, 2:17. Status, pending storage. And down in the basement, behind the authorized personnel door, the drawers stayed quiet, for now. But sometimes, when the hospital is busy upstairs and nobody has time to check the basement logs, the line on the temperature chart drops again. Below freezing, below sense. And in the morgue, something shifts in the dark, stretching old fingers, preparing to stand, waiting for someone new to come tag the dead. Because I am always cold, and I am never finished. They like to call it urban exploration, a clean name for a dirty hunger. People drive out of the city at night, chasing places that have been abandoned long enough for the world to forget them. Factories, tunnels, schools, and hospitals. Especially hospitals, because a hospital is never just a building. It is a collection of endings stacked on top of each other. And when the doors close, for for the last time, those endings don't leave. They settle. They soak into the concrete. They wait. Up on the mountain road, where the fog clings to the trees like wet gauze, there is an old sanatorium. The locals call it St. Marrow, as if joking will keep them safe. Its windows are broken. Its paint is peeled. Its entrance sign is rusted so badly you can barely read the letters. The government declared it condemned years ago. They fenced it off. They locked the doors. And then they did what humans always do when they want to feel brave. They forgot. But I did not. Because St. Marrow never closed. Not to me. Not really. I kept admitting patients long after the last doctor quit. I kept making beds. I kept the lights on in the places no one thought to check. And when the world stopped sending ambulances, I learned to bring my own. The first time they came, they were laughing. 4 young voices, bright and careless, echoing in the dark as they stepped over the broken fence with a camera and a flashlight. They called themselves Midnight Proof. That was the name of their channel. They filmed challenges, dares, ghost hunts, anything that made strangers leave comments and hit like. They didn't believe in anything they couldn't monetize. That's what made them easy. The leader was a man named Carter, all confidence and jawline, the kind of human who thinks he's immortal because nothing bad has happened to him yet. With him were 3 friends. Jenna, sharp eyes and quick laughter, always checking angles for the best shot. Miles, nervous, eager to prove he belonged. And Theo, quiet, filming everything, never speaking unless he had to. They pushed open the main doors with a groan of old hinges. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Not freezing, just preserved. A smell of dust and antiseptic clung to the halls like memory. Carter panned the camera around the lobby. "All right," he whispered dramatically. "We're inside St. Marrow Sanatorium. Locals say this place is haunted. People go missing up here. Tonight we're going to prove it's just stories." He grinned into his own lens. "Let's go find the morgue." They always want the morgue. Humans chase horror like it's entertainment, until horror answers. St. Marrow was built for long stays, for patients who didn't get better quickly, for lungs that failed slowly, for minds that cracked under isolation and cold mountain air. The rooms were small, lined with hooks where oxygen masks once hung. In the hallways, old signs remained, faded but readable. Ward A, respiratory. Ward B, recovery. Ward C, quiet patients only. They moved through it like tourists. Flashlights swept over peeling paint, broken wheelchairs, rusted bed frames. Jenna filmed a close-up of a cracked mirror. "Dude," she said, voice a little too high. "Look at this place. It's like a horror movie set." Miles laughed, but it sounded forced. Theo didn't laugh at all. He paused at a bulletin board covered in curling papers. Old discharge notices, yellowed memos, handwritten reminders, and something else. A ledger, half hidden under dust. Theo brushed it clean. On the cover, stamped in faded black ink, "Admissions, St. Marrow." He opened it. The pages were thick, the handwriting neat, Names, dates, room numbers. He flipped forward, expecting the entries to stop decades ago. They didn't. The last page had a name written in fresh ink, dark and wet, like it had been placed there minutes ago. Theo swallowed. "Guys," he said quietly. Carter didn't turn. "Hold that thought, Theo. We need good footage." Theo lifted the ledger and followed, but he kept staring at the last entry, as if it might change if he blinked. It didn't. Admission date, tonight. Patient, Miles Hawkins' room, 404. Status, pending intake. Miles' laugh died in his throat. "That's not funny," he whispered. Carter finally looked. He scoffed. "Okay. Nice. Someone's messing with us." He pointed the camera at Theo's hands. "Show the page." Theo did. Jenna's smile faded. Miles stepped back, flashlight trembling. It has my full name," he said. "How?" The ink shimmered slightly in the beam of the flashlight, as if alive. And I, patient and calm, listened to the first real fear bloom in their chests. Because fear is the only true admission form, they kept going anyway. Of course they did. People never turn around when the road finally shows them where it ends. They reached a long corridor where the ceiling had caved in, leaving a gap that revealed black sky through broken beams. The air here was colder, their breath fogged. Carter clapped his hands. "All right, new rule," he said, trying to sound brave. "We split up for 5 minutes. Classic ghost hunt. If anything happens, scream." "Absolutely not," Jenna said immediately. Miles nodded too fast. "Yeah, no, man." Theo said nothing, but his eyes were fixed on the darkness at the end of the hallway. Carter rolled his eyes. "Fine, no splitting up. You guys are ruining content." They walked toward the old nurse's station. A desk still sat there, covered in dust. Behind it, shelves of folders, medical records. Carter's camera zoomed in. "Look at this," he whispered, delighted now. "This is gold." Jenna reached out and pulled a folder free. It disintegrated at the edges, paper brittle. But inside, the forms were intact. Names, diagnoses, notes. Jenna flipped through until she stopped. Her face went pale. This is dated last week," she said. Carter laughed. "No, it's not." She shoved the page toward him. There it was, a progress note, typed in a modern font, on paper that should not exist in this building. Patient shows signs of improvement. Still reports being watched at night. Carter's laugh faltered. Theo turned his camera slightly away from them. He aimed it at the corridor behind the station, because something had moved there. Not a figure, not a ghost in the way humans expect. Just a shift in the darkness, as if the shadows had rearranged themselves to make room. Miles whispered, "Do you hear that?" They froze. Under the distant tap of rain on broken glass, under the hum of their own nervous breathing, there was another sound. A soft rolling. Wheels. Slow, steady, coming from down the hall. Carter forced a grin into his camera. "Okay," he said, voice tight. "We've got atmospheric sound effects." But his eyes weren't smiling. He could hear it too. The wheels drew closer, and then, in the darkness beyond their flashlights, a faint rectangle of light appeared, a doorway opening, a light turning on, in a building with no power. Carter's camera shook slightly as he panned toward it. "All right," he muttered. That's new." Jenna grabbed his sleeve. "Carter, we should go." He hesitated, because pride is a chain heavier than fear. Then the wheels stopped, right outside the nurse's station. A hospital bed rolled into view, empty, clean, too clean. The sheet on it was crisp white, corners tucked like someone had just made it. And attached to the rail was a plastic wristband, a patient ID band. Miles leaned in without meaning to. His flashlight caught the name printed on it. Miles Hawkins. He stumbled back, choking on air. "No," he whispered. "No, no." The bed creaked softly, as if something invisible had just sat down on it. The sheet depressed slightly in the center. And then, slowly, gently, the bed began to roll forward, toward Miles. Theo backed up, filming, breathing fast. Jenna screamed. Carter grabbed the bed rail and shoved it, hard, trying to force it away. The bed didn't move like an object. It moved like a decision. It rolled anyway. Because St. Maro was doing what it was built to do. Admit, assign, contain. I didn't need to chase them. The hospital itself was my hands. They ran back through corridors that seemed longer than before. Doors they passed easily were now closed, swollen with humidity, refusing to open. The exit signs flickered, pointing them deeper inside. Carter cursed, slamming his shoulder into a door. It wouldn't budge. Jenna cried, flashlight shaking so badly the beam jumped across walls like a frantic heartbeat. Miles was sobbing now, repeating, "I didn't do anything. I didn't." Theo kept filming, not because he was brave, because some part of him understood that footage was the only proof he would ever have of what was happening. They turned a corner and stopped dead. The corridor ahead was lit, not with their flashlights, with steady fluorescent light. And at the end of that corridor, a nurse's station, pristine, a modern computer monitor glowing, a figure in scrubs standing behind the desk, not moving, just waiting. Carter swallowed. "Is that a person?" The figure lifted its head. The face was blurred in their eyes, like trying to focus on something underwater. But the voice that came from it was calm, familiar, clinical. "Patient Miles Hawkins," it said. "Admitted, pending intake." Miles screamed and tried to run back the way they came. The hallway behind them was no longer the hallway they'd just been in. It was a blank wall, smooth, painted, clean, as if the hospital had simply decided they didn't need that exit anymore. Carter's confidence collapsed all at once. He raised the camera, voice breaking. "This isn't real," he said, as if saying it could make it true. The figure in scrubs tilted its head slightly. Then it spoke again, this time not to them, to the intercom. The speakers crackled overhead, old and new at the same time, and my voice, soft as breath against glass, filled the hall. "Welcome to St. Maro," I whispered. We've been expecting you." The lights brightened. Behind the nurse's station, a door clicked open. A sign above it glowed. "Intake." The hospital bed rolled in from the side corridor again, perfectly timed, waiting like a carriage. Miles tried to fight. Jenna grabbed him, pulling, crying. Carter stumbled forward, desperate now, trying to hold on to control. Theo filmed it all, eyes wide, mouth shaking. And as the bed reached Miles, the sheet lifted slightly, like hands gathering fabric, like a hospital tucking in a patient. Miles vanished, not dragged, not killed, just admitted. The bed rolled away, slow and satisfied, wheels whispering against the tile. Jenna screamed his name until her throat broke. Carter stared at his camera as if it could save him. Theo kept filming, tears running down his face. And in the glow of the intake light, the admissions ledger sat open on the desk. A fresh line appeared on the page, written in ink so dark it looked like blood. Patient, Jenna Sullivan, room 207, status, pending. Jenna saw it. Her scream turned into a whimper. She shook her head violently. "No, no!" Carter backed away, whispering, "We're leaving. We're leaving right now." He turned toward the intake door, because humans always run toward the brightest light. Theo followed, still filming, because he didn't know what else to do. And I watched them go, calm, patient, satisfied, because St. Mara doesn't need ambulances. It doesn't need staff. It doesn't need permission. All it needs is one simple thing: someone to enter. Someone curious enough to step inside and call it a challenge. Someone who thinks abandonment means emptiness. They never learn the difference between closed and finished. St. Maro is closed, yes, but it is not finished. Some nights, hikers on the mountain road report seeing lights in the broken windows. Some nights, a local swears they heard an intercom announcement echo down the foggy trees. And every once in a while, someone goes missing. Their phone is found days later at the bottom of a ravine, screen cracked, battery dead. No footage, no proof. Just another story the living tell each other to feel alive. But in my admissions ledger, the proof is neat. Names, dates, rooms. And if you ever feel tempted to drive up a mountain at night, chasing a thrill, chasing a ghost, remember this: hospitals don't just hold patients, they hold patterns. And I am a pattern that never learned how to discharge. So I keep the beds made. I keep the intake light on. I keep the doors ready. Because one night, someone will come again, laughing, filming, pretending. And when they step into St. Maro and the rain seals the world behind them, I will admit them too, quietly, carefully, forever. They built the psychiatric wing on the quiet side of the hospital, not because quiet helps people heal, because quiet helps people disappear. The doors are heavier here, the windows open only a finger's width. The hall lights never fully turn off, just dim enough to make shadows look like decisions. And in the middle of it all, behind a desk that smells of sanitizer and old coffee, sits a man whose job is to name what cannot be seen, to label fear, to translate horror into symptoms. His name was Dr. Adrian Lawn, and for a while, he believed he could diagnose me. Dr. Lawn was careful. He spoke softly. He didn't lean too close. He didn't raise his voice even when patients screamed in his face. He kept his office clean, his notes neat, his distance polite. That distance is important. Distance is how humans survive places like this. The psychiatric ward is full of stories no one believes. Voices in vents, faces in reflections, hands under beds. Most of them are lies. Not because the patients are lying, because their brains are trying to survive. But once in a while, among the noise, someone tells the truth. And the truth sounds exactly like madness on a Monday night. Rain tapping the reinforced windows, the hospital humming like a machine that never sleeps. DeLorme opened a new file. Patient Mira Caldwell. Reason for admission: acute paranoia, insomnia, reports of someone watching. He glanced at the intake notes and sighed the way doctors do when they think they've seen it all. He hadn't. Mira was 29, thin, bruises on her wrists from where she'd fought restraints in the ER. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from drugs, but from days without sleep. When she sat down across from him, she didn't look at his face. She looked just over his shoulder. "Tell me what's been happening," Dr. Lawn said. Mira swallowed, her throat moving like it hurt. "It knows my name," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "What does?" She finally met his eyes. "The hospital," she said. "Not the building. The thing inside it." Dr. Lawn made a note. Delusional framework. Personification of environment. Mira leaned forward, voice shaking. "It talks through the intercom," she said. "Not out loud. In the pauses, in the static." Dr. Lawn wrote again. Auditory hallucinations. Possible stress-induced psychosis. And Mira said something that made his pen hover. "It knows what I've never told anyone," she whispered. "Things I only thought." Dr. Lawn felt a small, cold prick under his ribs. He pushed it down. "Like what?" he asked. Mira's hands clenched into fists. "It told me I'd die the way my mother died," she said. "It told me the exact words she said in the ambulance." Dr. Lawn looked up sharply. He hadn't asked about her mother. It wasn't in the file. Mira's voice cracked. "How would it know that?" Dr. Lawn opened his mouth to offer a clinical explanation. I let him. "Trauma can present in..." "No," Mira snapped, sudden and sharp. "You don't understand. It wasn't my memory. It was a voice. Calm, patient, like it had been waiting for me to finally listen." Her eyes flicked again to the space behind him. "And it likes you," she added softly. Dr. Lawn's skin tightened. "Why would it like me?" he asked. Mira smiled without humor. "Because you write everything down," she whispered. "Because you make it real." In the days that followed, Mira wasn't alone. More patients came in with the same story, different ages, different backgrounds, different diagnoses. but the same details, repeated like a script. A man detoxing from alcohol who swore the ceiling tiles whispered his failures. A teen with self-harm scars who said the bathroom mirror blinked at her. A woman with postpartum depression who insisted her baby's name appeared on locked doors that shouldn't display anything. And always, always, the same phrase, "It's watching." Dr. Lorne did what doctors do. He searched for patterns. He documented the claims. He adjusted medications. He spoke gently. He requested evaluations. He reassured staff. But on his private notepad, in the pages he didn't show anyone, he wrote something else. Shared theme. Unusual consistency. Patients describe presence with similar language. Possible cultural contagion, suggestibility, staff influence. He hated that he was interested. Interest is a crack. And I have lived inside cracks for a very long time. It started with the recordings. The ward had cameras in the hallways, not inside rooms. It had microphones in common areas. Everything for safety. Everything for liability. One night, a nurse called Dr. Lorne to the station. "Doctor," she said, voice low, "you need to see this." On the screen, hallway footage played. A patient, Mira, stood at the end of the corridor near the fire exit. She wasn't supposed to be there. The door was alarmed. She stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, listening. Then, without touching the handle, the fire exit door unlocked. It opened, just a few centimeters, as if someone on the other side had released it. The nurse paused the video and pointed at the audio waveform. "Listen," she whispered. They played it back. No footsteps, no alarms, no voices. Then, in the silence between the ward's hum and the faint static of the microphone, a sound slipped through. A breath, not Mira's. A second breath, slow and satisfied. And then, words, so quiet the captions software didn't catch them. So soft, you only heard them if you leaned in. "Come closer." The nurse's face went pale. Dr. Lorne stared at the screen, throat dry. He should have dismissed it. Poor microphone quality, compression artifacts, suggestion. But he couldn't, because he recognized the tone. Not the words, the tone. Calm, patient, like it had been waiting. That night, Dr. Lorne went back to his office after his rounds and closed the door. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the patient notes. He read what he'd written about Mira. Auditory hallucinations, paranoia, possible psychosis. He stared at the words until they felt thin, like paper held up to a flame. Then he opened a new document, a personal log. He typed, "There is a possibility that something environmental is influencing patient reports." His cursor blinked at the end of the sentence. Like a pulse, like a small eye. He leaned back and rubbed his face. That's when the intercom crackled. Not the loud announcement system, not overhead. The small speaker in his office wall, meant for emergencies and quick calls. It clicked once, then static, then silence. And in that silence, a voice, so close it felt like it came from inside his skull. Write it properly, I said. Dr. Lorne froze. His chair creaked under him. He looked at the intercom. The red light wasn't on. No call was active. He swallowed. Who is this? Silence. Then, softly, someone you've already described, I said, in your own words. His heart hammered. He stood up and checked the hallway. Empty. He returned to the desk, hands trembling just enough to make the cursor wobble when he touched the mouse. He deleted the sentence, and without understanding why, he began to type something else. The hospital is observing patients through systems that cannot be clinically explained. He stopped, stared. That wasn't his language. Too certain, too intimate. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then the cursor moved, not by his hand. It slid to the top of the document, clicked, and typed a title. Initial assessment. The observer, Delire, got Lorne's breath hitched. He slammed the laptop shut. The office went quiet again. For a moment, he thought it was over. Humans are adorable that way. They believe in over. The next day, Mira asked for him. She sat in the same chair, same posture, same eyes that refused to focus on his face for too long. You heard it, she said. Dr. Lorne forced his voice to remain calm. I heard something, he admitted carefully. Mira nodded as if that was enough. It doesn't want you to call it a symptom, she whispered. It wants you to call it a name. Dr. Lorne's throat tightened. Why? Mira's gaze drifted behind him again. Because names make it real, she said. And you make everything real. Dr. Lorne leaned forward, fighting the cold feeling spreading up his spine. What does it want? He asked. Mira smiled, small and tired. It wants a file, she said. A proper one. Then she added, almost kindly, it wants you to admit it. Over the next week, the ward changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone could point to in a meeting. Small things. Doors unlocking when no one swiped a badge. Lights flickering only when certain patients walked under them. Medication drawers opening to the exact slot a nurse needed as if guided. And always, always, the same calm static in the intercom at night. Dr. Lorne stopped sleeping. He tried earplugs. White noise. Medication. It didn't matter, because I wasn't coming from outside. I was coming from the gaps in his attention, those thin moments between waking and sleep, where the mind is most honest. He began to see me everywhere the hospital recorded him, in reflections on dark computer screens, in the faint ghost image on security footage, in the pause before an automatic door opened. Not a figure, a presence, a certainty. Dr. Lorne sat at his desk and opened the laptop. His hands didn't shake now. That was worse. He clicked into the hospital's record system. He created a new patient file. The cursor waited. He typed a name. The observer. Date of birth. Blank. Address. Blank. Emergency contact. None. Diagnosis. He hesitated, and in the silence of his office, the intercom clicked once like a tongue against teeth. Use your own language, I whispered. Dr. Lorne swallowed. His fingers moved. Primary diagnosis, persistent presence. Secondary, influence over systems, attention, and sleep. He stared at the screen, breathing slowly. Then he wrote the admission note, not in bullet points, not in clinical distance, in first person. The words flowed too smoothly, too cleanly. He tried to stop. His hands kept moving. I observe them when they are at their softest. I speak to them through silence. I take their fear and make it orderly. Dr. Lawn's eyes filled with tears. He wasn't crying from sadness. He was crying from the terror of realizing his body had become a tool. His fingers typed the final line, attending physician, Dr. Adrian Lawn. Then the cursor moved to the signature field. His ID was already there. His digital signature glowed, waiting. He whispered, voice broken, please. The intercom answered with a soft, satisfied breath, and his hand clicked. Signed. The ward didn't explode. No alarm screamed. No lights went out. The hospital simply accepted the new patient into its system. Accepted me. And that is when Dr. Lawn felt it. The gentle shift of something settling into place. Like a lock turning. Like a door finally closing. They found him in his office at morning rounds. Sitting upright, hands folded neatly on the desk, eyes open and empty. No struggle. No note. The official cause was unknown. A cardiac event, maybe. Stress, lack of sleep. They archived his patient logs. They reassigned his caseload. They moved on, because hospitals always do. But the file he created remained. The observer. Status, admitted location, psychiatric wing notes, confidential. And now, when new patients arrive and whisper that someone is watching, when they point to the corner of the room and refuse to look directly at the shadows, the staff nod gently and say, "You're safe here." They mean well. They always do. But sometimes, late at night, when the intercom crackles and the ward holds its breath, a nurse will open the system and see a new consult request appear, unsigned, waiting patiently in the queue. Consult requested, the observer, and beneath it, in the attending field, Dr. Adrian Lawn, because he diagnosed me. He gave me a file. He made me real. And now, inside this hospital, I have something I've always wanted. A name that belongs on paper. A place in the system. And a doctor who will never stop writing for me. Not in ink, not in blood, but in the quiet, obedient language of records that no one questions until it's too late. Most hospitals have a floor nobody talks about. Sometimes it's a psychiatric wing that doesn't exist. Sometimes it's an old maternity ward where nothing cries anymore. Sometimes it's just a row of doors behind a locked fire door, painted the same color as the wall, like a scar someone tried to cover. In this hospital, they call it the closed floor. If you ask where it is, they'll tell you, "Oh, that was demolished years ago." "Oh, it's just storage now." "Oh, the elevators don't even stop there anymore." They're only half right. The buttons don't show it. The maps don't mark it. The staff pretend to forget it, but the elevator remembers, and so do I. You've been in one of those elevators before, haven't you? Metal box, soft yellow light, the smell of disinfectant and someone else's fear. The doors close. You're alone with your reflection in the steel. For a moment, you exist in a vertical coffin that moves. Up, down, life, death, emergency, discharge. The hospital runs on those motions, lifting patients through stages of suffering and recovery, night after night. I like that. The repetition, the clicking of floors, the little chime that says, "You've arrived." This hospital has 13 floors on paper. The buttons show 12. You can already guess which one they erased. His name was Dr. Elias Ward, new resident, too tall for his scrubs, too thin for his shifts. He wore his exhaustion like an extra layer of clothing. On his third week, he got his first true night shift alone. And supervising senior on his floor, just a phone number and the instruction. Call if someone stops breathing. He tried to laugh when they said it. He didn't. That night, he moved between the emergency department on the second floor and the general ward on the 8th. Up and down, up and down. The same elevator, the same buzzing light, the same feeling that the building was much bigger than the plans showed. At 3:17 a.m., he walked into the elevator, pressed 8, and leaned his head against the cool mirrored wall. The doors closed. The elevator moved. He didn't feel the rise, not exactly. Sometimes humans are too tired to feel anything. But he did hear something, the panel beeping. He opened his eyes. No floors were lit. The 8 button was dark. The screen above the doors, which usually showed numbers, displayed nothing at all, just a horizontal line. He frowned, pushed 8 again. The elevator ignored him. It stopped. The line on the screen dissolved, replaced by a symbol that should not exist in any hospital in this city. A simple, blocky number. You think these stories always exaggerate. They don't. The doors opened to a corridor he had never seen. He told himself it was a service floor, storage, maintenance. Humans love naming things. It calms them. The light was different here. It wasn't the harsh white of active clinical areas. It had a faded yellow tone, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The floor tiles were the same size as the other levels, but older. Hairline cracks, stains that had been scrubbed until the color of the tile changed around them. On the wall opposite the elevator, a faded sign. Ward 13, long-term care. No visitors after 2000. His brain rejected it. There was no Ward 13. The hospital's orientation session had been very clear about that. Floors 1 through 12, with 4 partially closed and 11 being admin. But the sign looked as if it had hung there for decades, as if thousands of eyes had read it and obeyed it. He stepped out. The elevator doors stayed open, patiently. I kept them that way. Hospitals leave traces of themselves, like fingerprints. Old tape marks where posters used to be. Screw holes where clocks once hung. Shadow rectangles on the wall where something heavier blocked the sunlight for years. Elias saw all of that. An empty frame with a square of cleaner paint inside it. Nail marks near a door handle. A metal track running along the ceiling, where curtains once slid back and forth around beds that were gone now. No sound, no alarms, no footsteps. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. You think that's a trick, don't you? It isn't. Wireless signals move through air, through walls, through space. I move through something thinner, the absence of attention. He should have stepped back into the elevator, pressed any button, hit the alarm. Instead, he walked forward, because curiosity is stronger than fear, until it isn't. The first door he tried was open, room 1307. Inside, the outlines of 4 beds, faint on the floor. The window was covered with blinds so old they had fused together in a crooked line of plastic. He reached for the light switch out of habit. The lights came on. He froze, because someone had to be paying an electricity bill for this. He stepped further in. The air had that stale, almost sweet smell of old dust that has mixed with chemical cleaners for so long they've become one flavor. On the wall, above the place where a headboard had once been, small hooks still held the shape of something that had hung there. Picture frames, maybe, get well cards, religious icons. He brushed his fingertips over one hook. For a second, the room flickered. 4 beds, 4 shapes under white sheets, 4 monitors humming, 4 faces turned toward him, eyes wide, mouths slightly parted. Then they were gone. He stumbled back, heart pounding. His rational mind searched for explanations. Sleep deprivation, residual images in his retina, a trick of the light. I love watching your brains scramble to protect themselves. He backed out of the room, turned, and nearly collided with the sign he hadn't seen before. Pinned to the wall outside, yellowed and curling at the edges. Ward 13, patient list, do not remove. He scanned the paper, rows of names, dates of admission, no discharge dates, handwritten notes in the margins. Confused but stable, still asking about downstairs. Thinks he died during surgery, reorient every shift. His eyes caught on a column header, attending physician. One name repeated over and over in shaky black ink. D-R-E-W-N-A-R-D, his own. Of course it wasn't really his handwriting, not yet. But the shape of the letters was right. The way the W dipped, the angle of the R. Possible, his rational mind muttered, that there had been another Dr. Ward here once, years ago. Nothing but coincidence. Coincidence has always been one of my favorite tools. He reached out and touched the paper. Ink bled under his fingertip. The letters of his name darkened, as if freshly written. Behind him, a soft sound, a breath, not his. They were on the beds again. He hadn't heard them appear. No one had rolled them in. They were just occupied now. 4 patients. A woman with grey hair, eyes clouded but aware. A middle-aged man with a scar running down his chest. A young woman with a shaved head and a chemo port. A boy barely old enough to be on this ward at all. All of them had something in common. He had seen their faces before, on other floors, on other nights. in other rooms where the alarms had gone off and someone had shouted his name. He approached the nearest bed. The man with the chest scar stared at the ceiling. "Mr. Hallett?" Elias whispered. No response. He had been there when Mr. Hallett's heart stopped 3 nights earlier. He remembered the way his monitor had flatlined, the shouting, the compressions, the moment the senior doctor had said, "Time of death." He remembered signing the death note. But here was the same scar, the same birthmark on the neck, the same way the hands curled around the blanket. "Doctor." The voice came from the boy's bed. Elias turned, throat tight. The boy's lips had barely moved. His eyes were fixed on some point beyond Elias's shoulder. "You didn't come back," the boy said softly. "You said you would stay." Tears stung the corners of Elias's eyes. He had sat with this boy during a long, bad night of fever. He had promised he would be there until morning. Morning had been busy. There had been other calls, other crises. He had not gone back. He had heard later that the boy's condition had worsened. He hadn't gone to the funeral. Where are we?" Elias managed. The boy's gaze drifted to the doorway. "To the floor where you put us," he said. "The one where nobody gets discharged. You'd like to believe that I created all of this from nothing. I didn't. I only built a place for what you leave behind. You think patients die and vanish. They don't. They leave marks. On sheets. On walls. In the minds of the nurses who remember exactly how they stopped breathing. In the hearts of the doctors who file their deaths away as a necessary statistic. But marks aren't enough for me. I take the unspoken guilt, the broken promises, the half-finished treatments, the "I'll be back in a minute" that never materialized, and I give them a corridor, a ward, a floor between the living and the dead. Ward 13. Dr. Ward stood in the middle of that room, surrounded by 4 patients whose stories had ended on other floors. "You can't be here," he whispered. But he knew he was wrong. They couldn't be on the floors downstairs anymore. So I put them somewhere else. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor were still open. They had never closed. I am not cruel, you know. I always leave the doors open. He backed away, heart pounding, until his shoulders hit the wall. His name on the patient list pulsed at the edge of his vision. Not yet written, not yet complete. He had a choice. He could stay, sit at their bedsides, try to fix what had already broken, or he could run. You already know which one he picked. He turned and ran for the elevator, shoes squeaking on the worn tiles. Each step echoed in the long, empty hall. Behind him, the rustle of sheets, a soft chorus of voices calling his name. "Dr. Ward, Doctor, Elias, you said you would stay." The elevator doors remained open, waiting like the mouth of something patient. He threw himself inside. The panel lit up again. This time, the numbers appeared. 12, 11, 10, 9. He stabbed at 8, at 2, at anything. The doors closed. As the box descended, he stared at his reflection in the steel. For a heartbeat, his face wasn't alone. Behind him, crowding the small space, were dozens of faces. Grey, bruised, burned, pale, eyes open, all of them looking straight at him. Then the elevator chimed. Ding! The doors opened onto the bright, noisy, familiar chaos of the emergency department. Phones ringing, nurses moving, monitors beeping. He stumbled out. No one noticed he was shaking. No one asked why his scrubs were dusted with plaster, or why his shoes carried a thin film of dust from a floor that didn't exist. He looked back. The elevator was empty. The number display above it read 2. Nothing more. He never spoke of Ward 13. Who would believe him? He told himself it had been a dream, a micro-sleep incident in the elevator, a stress hallucination. He signed more death notes. He held more hands. He broke more promises he meant to keep. The years passed. His title changed. Resident, attending, head of internal medicine. The sign on his office door bore his full name, Dr. Elias Ward. Every so often, late at night, the elevator takes him to the wrong floor. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to see the faded sign. Just long enough to hear a voice, or 4 or 40, calling his name from down the corridor. He never steps out now. He presses another button and pretends he didn't see it. But the paper on the wall up there, the one that lists the attending physician for every forgotten patient, has been updated. The ink is dark. The letters are steady. D-R-E-D-A-R-D. Every bed, every room, every name. You say, at least that floor isn't real. That's where you're wrong. It is more real than you think. Floors you walk on, the wards with their fluorescent lights and shiny equipment, are temporary. They will be renovated, repainted, renamed. Ward 13 will not. As long as there are doctors who are too tired, too busy, too human to keep all their promises. I have work to do there, and the elevator will always remember the way. They call it an intensive care unit, as if suffering can be measured, organized, intensified, as if pain becomes more polite when you give it a name. In the ICU, the air is always cold. The lights never fully dim. The machines speak constantly in small, nervous tones. Beeps, alarms, soft clicks that sound almost like breath. People think the ICU is where the doctors fight death. They're wrong. It's where death listens. It's where I listen. And on one particular night, the entire unit held its breath for me. The man on shift was Dr. Simon Kessler. 36 hours awake, give or take. His eyes were red. His hands moved on memory more than intention. He wore that quiet, professional calm that humans put on when they're frightened of what they might feel if they stop moving. He wasn't cruel. That's important. Cruelty is messy, loud. Cruelty draws attention. Dr. Kessler was something I prefer. Tired, necessary, used. The ICU was full. Every bed occupied, every curtain drawn halfway, every monitor glowing like a small artificial heart. A nurse handed him a clipboard. Another called his name from the doorway. A ventilator hissed, steady and obedient. Outside, rain pressed against the windows in dark sheets, turning the city into a smear of lights and water. It was almost peaceful. Almost. At 2:41 a.m., Bed 6 began to alarm, a sharp, insistent sound, a bright red warning on the monitor. Kessler turned, already walking, already reaching for the bed's chart. Then the alarm stopped. Not the way alarms usually stop, when someone silences them, when a vital stabilizes. It stopped as if it had never started. The monitor returned to calm blue, heart rate 82, oxygen 96. The nurse beside the bed frowned. "It was bradying," she said. "I saw it dip." Kessler glanced at the trend line. Nothing. The trace was smooth. No dip, no spike, no evidence of danger. Humans hate that, because evidence is how they keep the world sane. Kessler forced a small smile. "False trigger," he said, "because that's what you say when you're too tired to investigate a ghost in the wires." He moved on. I let him. For now. Do you know what a monitor really is? You think it measures life. It doesn't. It measures permission. It decides when a nurse is allowed to panic, when a doctor is required to run, when a body's quiet failure becomes an emergency that draws hands and voices and attention. And attention, real, focused attention, is the only thing in a hospital that can keep someone from slipping away unnoticed. So I don't fight doctors, I fight attention. On that night, I started small. A warning that silenced itself, a dip in oxygen that never appeared in the chart, a brief flutter of the heart that left no trace behind. It happened again at 3:06. Bed 2. A woman post-op, fragile, her chest rising mechanically under the ventilator's rhythm. The alarm chirped once, just enough to turn heads. Then silence. Kessler approached, checked her pupils, her skin, her lungs. Everything looked fine. But the nurse swore she'd seen the number drop. "Maybe it's the leads," Kessler said, adjusting a wire that did not need adjustment. He wrote it down anyway, in the margin of his mind, because even exhausted humans notice patterns. And I was beginning to draw one. By 3:30, it wasn't just one bed. It was 3. Bed 6 again. Bed 2 again. Now bed 9. An older man with pneumonia, lungs heavy and stubborn. Each time, a moment of panic, followed by the strangest thing. The record erased itself. Not literally, not in a way anyone could point at and say, the system is hacked. No, more subtle. The monitor's memory simply smoothed over the rough parts, like someone stroking wrinkled fabric until it looks flat. If you looked at the trend, you'd see peace. If you looked at the patient, you'd see truth. Sweating skin, shallow breaths, eyes that flickered with the fear of a body that knows it is failing. The nurses began to whisper. "It's like it doesn't want us to see it," one said. She meant the machine. She meant fate. She meant nothing she could safely name. Kessler heard her, but he didn't answer. He was staring at the central station, the long screen that displayed every bed's vital signs like a constellation of fragile stars. He watched it the way you watch the ocean when you know something is moving beneath the surface. And then it happened. All at once. All the monitors, every bed, every line, went quiet. Not dark, not off, quiet. The traces on the screen froze in place mid-beat, a still heart, a still breath, a held moment. The alarms did not sound, the ICU did not scream. It simply stopped speaking. For 3 seconds, the unit was a photograph, and in those 3 seconds, I owned it. Kessler's stomach dropped. He tapped the screen. Nothing changed. A nurse slapped the side of the monitor in bed 4 like it was an old television. "Restart," someone called, voice sharp. But the devices didn't restart. They didn't crash. They continued to display perfect stability, frozen in time, as if reality had paused politely for a breath. Kessler moved fast now, real fear in his body, cutting through exhaustion. He went bed to bed, not trusting the screens, checking the only truth left, the human in the bed. And that was when he understood. The patients were still breathing, most of them, but the ones in bed 2, bed 6, and bed 9 were not. Their chests had stopped moving, their mouths were slightly open, their eyes stared at nothing. No alarms, no flashing red, no urgent tones to call the staff to attention. Only a quiet, clinical display of normal numbers. Kessler pressed fingers to bed 6's neck. No pulse. He looked up at the monitor. Heart rate, 82. He pressed harder, as if pressure could force reality to be honest. Nothing. "Code," he shouted, and the word finally tore the ICU out of its trance. Nurses moved, hands flew. Someone hit the emergency button. Alarms started late, confused, as if embarrassed that they'd been silent. Kessler started compressions on bed 6, rhythm steady, jaw clenched. He felt ribs give. He heard a nurse whisper, "Why didn't it alarm?" Why indeed? Because I told it not to. Do you know how easy it is to silence a machine? You imagine some dramatic possession. A ghost in the wires, sparks flying, screens flickering. That's not my style. I don't need spectacle. I need belief. Machines are obedient. They do what they're told. And on nights when humans are exhausted, when the unit is understaffed, when rain hammers the windows, and everyone secretly prays for the shift to end, a machine's obedience becomes my weapon. The ICU runs on protocols. If X happens, do Y. If the number drops below this, call that. If the alarm sounds, respond. But what happens when X happens and the number lies? What happens when the alarm stays quiet? Then the doctors do nothing, not because they don't care, but because they don't know. Ignorance is my favorite anesthetic. They brought bed 6 back, briefly. A weak rhythm, a line on the screen that finally admitted the truth. Kessler's hands were shaking by the time he stepped away. Then bed 2 went. No warning, just a sudden stillness like a candle going out without smoke. This time, the monitor chirped once, then returned to normal. Kessler watched it happen, watched the moment the machine chose silence over truth. He stood there, staring at the numbers, and something inside him broke. Not loudly, just a hairline crack, the kind you don't notice until the wall collapses later. He pulled up the patient's data history, digging into the trend logs, the event markers, anything that could prove what he was seeing. He found nothing. The system showed a calm night, no codes, no interventions, no drops, perfect performance. That's what terrified him most. Because if the hospital's record says nothing happened, then nothing happened. On paper, on liability forms, in the stories doctors tell themselves so they can sleep. And if nothing happened, then no one is responsible, not even me. At 4:12 a.m., Kessler walked into the supply room and closed the door behind him. For a moment, away from the beeping and the bodies, he leaned against a shelf stacked with sterile packs and felt the weight of his own breathing. He whispered, barely audible, "What are you?" He wasn't talking to a person. He wasn't talking to a machine. He was talking to the feeling that something was watching him through glass and numbers, that something had been there longer than he had. He didn't know I was listening, or maybe he did. I answered, gently, in the only language the ICU truly understands. A sound, a single soft alarm tone from the central station outside. One chirp, like a heartbeat, then silence. Kessler opened the door and stepped back into the unit. Every monitor was frozen again. Not all of them, just the ones that mattered. Bed 2, Bed 6, Bed 9, and one more, Bed 12, his. He hadn't even noticed he'd been assigned a bed on the screen, an employee health profile, an ID badge linked to biometric access, a quiet little square in the corner of the system that tracked his steps and logins and heart rate through the hospital's wearable scanner. Hospitals track everyone. They just pretend they don't. On the screen, Bed 12's heart rate was displayed. Kessler's heart, in his chest, was pounding far higher than that. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. The monitor didn't care. It showed calm. It showed control. It showed a lie smooth enough to sleep on. He took a step toward the central station, and in the reflection of the dark screen, behind his own face, he saw me. Not a shadow, not a figure, a shape made of lines, of flat traces, of perfect numbers, a presence that lived in the pause between alarm and response. He blinked, and the ICU started breathing again. Monitors resumed, lines moved, beeping returned, as if nothing had happened, as if the night had been normal. Kessler stood still, eyes wide, chest tight, listening to the chorus of machines. And for the first time, he understood what the ICU really is. Not a place where death is defeated, a place where death negotiates, where it waits politely behind protocols, where it can be delayed or accelerated simply by whether anyone is allowed to note it. That night, 3 patients died without a single alarm calling for help, and the system recorded a calm shift. Kessler never found proof. He filed reports anyway, worded carefully, cautiously, because doctors are taught to fear claims they can't defend. Weeks later, IT checked the monitors. They replaced a cable. They updated firmware. They said, "It's fixed." The ICU believed them because it needed to. But sometimes, when rain hits the windows just right, when the unit is understaffed, When everyone is tired enough to trust the numbers, the monitors hold their breath again. And I listen, because in the ICU, silence isn't peace. Silence is permission. And I am always waiting for the moment the machines decide to give it to me.